Makerere University. My name is Josephine Ahichire. I'm the principal, College of Humanities and Social Sciences, but also a long-term associate of CODESRIA. I always say that CODESRIA has a capillary effect. Even if you don't feel it, it is there. Its significance on the continent cannot be rivaled. So we are very glad that we are here. I'm just going to give a few logistical notes, and then we begin the session. One is that this morning we are going to be fewer members of the reflection meeting as part of the Gender Institute. But we said that we cannot bring CODESRIA with all its important dignitaries, important scholars on the continent, and close them up in a hotel. So today, the morning will be quiet with our sessions as normal, but the afternoon will be a public event. The same panels, but open to a larger audience, our students, members of staff, because we think that's how we build intellectual communities. That's how we motivate young people to also be interested in some of these questions that we are dealing with. So don't be overwhelmed by this large room. In the afternoon, it will be different. But also, we wanted you to visit Makerere University. This is the first university in Eastern Central Africa, established in 1922. And the whole of last year, we were celebrating 100 years of existence. And so you are still part of the celebration of 100 years of Makerere University. So, Professor Murunga, I really want to welcome you. Karibu sana. Finally, you're here. And we are really glad that this reflection meeting, a different kind of agenda institute, is happening here at Makerere University. So we are very happy as a college to be co-hosting this. So tomorrow we shall meet at the hotel where you are boarded, spending your nights. So you spend your nights and your days in the same hotel. But today, you are at Makerere, and you're welcome at Makerere University. So with those few logistics, let me now officially, in my capacity, welcome you. But the broader management of Makerere will come in the afternoon to also welcome the visitors to Makerere University. And for us, we are really happy to be here. But I think that in the interest of really creating a community, we could introduce ourselves briefly so that then we are able to mingle, mix and mingle. At least we all know the Executive Secretary of CODESRIA, Professor Godwin Murunga, who is a long-term friend of Makerere University. When he's here, you think he's a Makererian, but we want to disown him because he took too long to bring the Gender Institute here. But Karibu Sana, you're welcome. So let's have the mic and we introduce ourselves. You can start, yeah.
My name is Indri Asiel Lumumba. I'm from Cote d'Ivoire, and I teach in the United States. So I'm very, very pleased to come to this gathering. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Grace Akelo. I teach in the north of Uganda. I teach medical anthropology, but I also teach behavioral science to medical students there. I'm pleased to be here, and thank you very much, CODESRIA, for inviting me.
Good morning. My name is Patricia Daly. I teach at the University of Oxford in England, and I teach in human geography. And I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
My name is Sekodi Uchendo from University of Nigeria. I'm a historian.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Mayada, I'm an economist, researcher, feminist researcher from Sudan, and I'm very happy to be here.
Good morning. I'm Sheila Bunwari from Mauritius. Used to be the Director of Research at CODESRIA, longtime family member of CODESRIA and friend of CODESRIA. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Professor of Development Studies and Governance.
Welcome.
Personne n'a les écouteurs. Good morning, everybody. I am Pendambo from Senegal. I teach for more than 30 years, 30 ans, history of medieval history of Western civilization, Western countries, and Islam. I had some political, not background, civil society background. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Faith Alube. I'm the Executive Director at the Kenya Land Alliance. It's great to be here.
Welcome.
Bonjour à tous, moi c'est Aboudi Vanessa, je suis doctorante en sciences politiques à l'Université de Yaoundé 2 au Cameroun et je suis également associée de recherche dans un think tank, le Ngafo Policy Institute. Merci.
She said she's Vanessa Abdi. She's from the University of Yaoundé in Cameroon, in the Department of Political Science.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Newman Tekwa. I'm from the South African Institute and Social Policy, University of South Africa. I'm very glad to be here. Maybe a few men who are here. I'm just counting how many are we. But I'm pleased to be here. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Awino Kech, Kenyan, first-time visitor to Makerere University. I'm very ashamed by that. But here I am. There's always a first time for everything. Based at the Department of Political and International Studies, Politics and International Studies at SOAS, University of London.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sabit Bruno. I'm a master's student of Gender Studies. I'm so privileged to be here.
Good morning, everyone. I think let me stand. I'm Bisu Musimenta, a senior lecturer in the School of Women and Gender Studies, Makerere University. And we are part of the local team here welcoming you. So we wanted you to first introduce yourselves so that we can welcome you. You are welcome to Makerere University.
Morning, I'm Patricia Gomes. I'm from Guinea-Bissau. I'm a researcher of the National Research Institute of Guinea-Bissau. I'm historian, so I'm very glad to be here. Thank you.
My name is Sharon Omotosho, the coordinator of Women's Research and Documentation Center, WADOC, at the Institute of African Studies, University of Ibadan. I also teach on the Gender Studies program there. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Pearl Sitole. I come from the University of the Free State in South Africa. I'm an anthropologist by training, but have done all sorts of things, like a true butterfly.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Lizzie Ella Isisima. I attended the first Gender Institute of CODESRIA. So I'm so proud to be here. I am a head of division in the Ministry of Decentralization and Local Development in Cameroon. I am a researcher on the issue of gender also. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Romola Ramtol. I'm an associate professor at the University of Mauritius, and my area of specialization is in gender studies, and it's good to meet long-time friends and colleagues from the University of Cape Town, Josephine, she was one of my external examiners. And I'm also on the executive committee of CODESRIA, so we've attended many of the gender symposiums in Cairo. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, I'm Denai Mupotsa. I teach in the Department of African Literature at WITS. I have a very complex and diverse disciplinary background. And yeah, I think that's enough for now.
My name is Adidoi Agur. I'm from the University of Ibadan. My area of specialization is comparative literature, gender, and biographical studies. I'm also Director, Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, University of Ibadan.
Bonjour à tous, je m'appelle Michel Mwangola du Kenya et je suis très heureux d'être ici parce que je suis une fille de Makerere, même si c'est ma première fois d'être ici. I'm Michel Mwangola from Kenya. I'm very happy to be here. I consider myself a daughter of Makerere, although like Awino, it's my first time here. My father went to school here, so it's really emotional for me to be here today. And I'm also really excited to be here at my first Gender Institute. I've been in CODESRIA for 25 years, always wanting to come to one. So I couldn't be happier than to be here for those two reasons. Thank you.
Bonjour, chers amis, chers collègues. Bienvenue en Uganda. Pour l'interprétation vers le français, nous avons essayé de vous fournir les écouteurs pour que vous puissiez suivre simultanément lorsque les intervenants parlent en anglais. Lorsque vous voulez faire une intervention ou vous avez une question en français, s'il vous plaît, veuillez nous faire signe. Nous allons venir et nous allons faire le consécutif. C'est ce qui se fera ici pour la visite à Makerere. Quand on sera dans l'autre local, ça sera beaucoup plus facile parce que là, on va fournir les écouteurs pour les anglophones et les francophones. Mais pour aujourd'hui, veuillez nous excuser. Vous voyez, les installations ici ne sont pas très amicales au bilingue. Donc nous veuillons nous excuser, mais nous allons essayer d'improviser comme les femmes le font. Dear ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, you're very welcome to Makerere. For interpretation, we have provided the listening aids to the francophones because certainly of the infrastructure as you can see it. So when the francophones would like to ask a question or make an intervention, they will make a sign and will come and do consecutive. Consecutive means you say one sentence, I say one sentence, like we do in the church. I also explained to them that the infrastructure is not very bilingual, but we'll try to improvise as women always do. But tomorrow, the technology will be completely perfect because we're going to have simultaneous for the francophone and for the anglophones, and you won't need to do to have consecutive in French. You're very welcome to Makerere.
Merci.
Yes, this is the Department of European and Oriental Languages facilitating the interpretation, and we're very proud that it is women facilitating this gender workshop.
Okay, I think we are done with logistics. We also have an exhibition which will run up to 5:30. So in the break, you can go around at the corner and you'll see what we have to exhibit, books and many other things that we have generated from the School of Women and Gender Studies, the college at large, CODESRIA, and some of our associate organizations, women's organizations. So in the interest of time, which we have already lost, let me request Professor Murunga to start us off in giving this institute a context so that we are all on the same page. Once again, karibu sana to Makerere University. I know you are an East African, there are many things that you know, but also we are proud to be hosting CODESRIA at this particular time. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Josephine. I hope you can allow me to be less formal with the titles so that we can have an easier time engaging with each other. As mentioned, my name is Godwin Murunga, Executive Secretary of CODESRIA. And let me return my word of gratitude to Makerere University, to the colleges that are hosting us, the School of Women and Gender Studies, which doesn't appear so prominently now, but it will in due course, for the collegiality, but also for accepting to host us. We didn't just parachute in. I think we had a range of conversations before we came here. And given the amount of time we need to recover, I want to make a proposal that I do both an introduction set of remarks and then a framing of the first panel of the meeting that we're going to have, which by implication means that I would request to be joined by the other presenters on the program, so that we just zoom through the presentations. So, Henry, remember, please, and Vanessa, if you can join me, we will merge this panel with the intro so that we try to recover some of the time that we've lost. While we are doing that, let me first of all thank all of you for accepting to join this session of the Gender Institute. I will speak to the reasons why we are here shortly, but just to make mention of the fact that the decision to have this year's Gender Institute organized in the form of a reflection has several reasons. The first one of which being that CODESRIA is 50 years old this year. And it's both a moment of reflection and a celebration. And we felt that we should try in a number of our core programs to do both a celebration and a reflection. And the Gender Institute fell in the set of activities we felt deserve this reflection and celebration. We're also going to do the same for the Governance Institute, whose meeting will be held a month from now in Lome, to do both a celebration and a reflection. The Gender Institute has been with CODESRIA for roughly 28 years. I think there are 3 instances when we could not convene the institute, and in 2 of them it was mainly because we were trying to recover from the COVID pandemic, and we just couldn't do it. Eventually we decided to hold what would qualify as a double institute, but we did it virtually. The Governance Institute began 2 years before the Gender Institute. And so the Governance Institute is doing its 30th year since we launched it in the early 90s. And so the question for us in the Secretariat then became, have we achieved anything? Have we achieved anything in 30 years? And number two, does the Institute as a vehicle for mobilizing research, building the capacities of young researchers, and bringing the message from the researchers to the policy world, does it remain a relevant vehicle for delivering on the commitments we made? So we thought that 30 years down the line, 28 years down the line, these are relevant questions to ask. And these questions are made even more important because 2023 is not just the 50th anniversary of CODESRIA. 2023 is at the same time the first year in a new 5-year strategic planning cycle. So too many things have actually converged that make it important for us to hold these reflections meeting. And it seems to me absolutely urgent that we answer the sets of questions that are placing themselves on the table for purposes of agenda setting, for purposes of planning into the next 5 years and more, and for purposes of making sure that we remain relevant with the work we do. Now, for the reflections on gender, it's even more important because the Gender Institute in CODESRIA has a history. And the history is one that is not driven by a specific intention in relation to creating an epistemic community. Those of you who attend the African Studies Association meetings last year, Amina Mama was invited to make a presentation, reflections on the creation of epistemic communities in Africa, and the reflection used the example of CODESRIA among a few other institutions to ask the question whether we actually are creating epistemic communities. And we complied in CODESRIA by sharing with her the set of data that we had. And one of the points she makes is that even though the CODESRIA programming around gender has made its presence felt, has made contribution in terms of contribution to knowledge production, it's difficult to detect the intention, deliberate one, to create an epistemic community of scholars who use gender, who deploy a feminist entry point to do their analysis. And that gave me pause because it reminded me that maybe we need to ask that question now, rather than assuming that we will, as a result of conducting our programs, making our activities, by some magic wand, create a community. So also sitting at the table is the question of what intentions do we have, not only for doing the Gender Institute, but actually for studying gender generally in CODESRIA. Are we satisfied with where gender is located in the framework of the overall CODESRIA programming? Are we still coming through as an institution as simply doing it in order to tick a box? Is it an add-on? Or is the labor that all of you have been contributing using your feminist frameworks beginning to make a dent on what used to be mainstream knowledge produced by CODESRIA? And for me, it has been troubling. I never was a laureate of the Gender Institute. I was a laureate of the Governance Institute. But it worries me that when we did the numbers for the participants in the Gender Institute since it was founded, of the roughly 428 or so participants who have passed through the Gender Institute, a majority of them were male. Okay? But in terms of actual mainstreaming and changing the terms of engagement around the gender question, we don't see a major upset, a major disruption of the overall male-centric social science knowledge that we continue to produce. And maybe it is appropriate that I'm the one saying it, because I think that we need to subject our institution to, we in the Secretariat need to engage into a serious process of introspection. And the community of scholarship should continue to push us to advance that introspection beyond simply a Secretariat thing that we do in Dakar. And when the evaluators come from NORAD, from DANIDA, we present statistics, they tick the box, they write nice reports. While on the ground we are not making as significant an advance as we should be 50 years down the line as CODESRIA, 28 years down the line doing gender. So roughly 5 years ago, we avoided using this word, but in effect that's what we did. We decided to do gender budgeting. We introduced budget lines into our annual budget in CODESRIA that were exclusive. So if we are supporting 50 MRI, meaning making research initiative groups, there is a certain number that are reserved. If we are doing a particular activity somewhere, we close up a certain number reserved for female academics. And then it hit us. It hit us. What hit us was that the problem was not so much that female academics were not interested in our programming. The problem is that we had not created a space within which they could compete on an equal basis. And so we received the applications based on that requirement that these ones are reserved for female academics, or they are reserved for groups of researchers led by a female academic and with majority of the members in that group being female. But at the level of selection, we did not do any affirmative action. And we received enough applications to the point where for the MRI groups that we supported, for instance, 2017, 2018, 2019, 52% of the successful applicants were female. Okay? So we did not need to do affirmative action at the level of the quality of proposals, because they were more competitive than the ones from the male colleagues. Now, this shouldn't have been news to all of us. Why did it take us so long to take that decision? I think it's the question that continues to strike us. And so I feel that this institute, the opportunity to reflect on this institute and to hear from you is going to be a useful opportunity to rethink the vehicle and the strategies we are using to make sure that not only are we talking about gendered analytical categories and using gender as an entry point, that we are pushing it towards a feminist analytical frameworks. It struck me when we were selecting the participants into this reflections meeting that in the 28 years that CODESRIA has run the institute, the word feminism never appeared in its title until 2017. So there's a certain androcentrism that has given us some comfort with doing gender. We don't want to ask the more difficult questions. So it's also an invitation to ask those questions because feminism makes many of us in Africa uncomfortable. Actually, it's at that point that we remember that some perspectives are from the West and others are African. We dissolve that boundary because it's unacceptable for me that simply just saying feminist scholarship has been difficult for the CODESRIA Gender Institute. And it has lulled us into a comfort zone that is comfortable to many of us in the community, but not necessarily comfortable for the knowledge we need to produce. Okay? So we organized the program around a set of questions which we have shared with you in the concept note that we sent you. And we asked Professor Fatuso to give the opening address. Unfortunately, she is unable to make it to Kampala because of a family challenge. But yesterday she recorded her keynote. We struggled overnight to get it sent to us from Dakar. Those of you who have been following the political trends in Senegal know that we went off the social media platforms since Thursday last week. It is a real body shock to Senegal and to the Senegalese citizens. You can see it when you are in Dakar. So we've been unable to effectively communicate because of that. But as I think the document only managed to sneak out at night, I hope that my colleagues, Dominique, will be able to download it so that we can play the video. We also asked our colleague Awino Okech to give the second keynote. And I want to take note that there is a generational conversation happening there. Okay? CODESRIA's success in terms of having the Gender Institute has been defined largely by feminist militants who forced the council to accept the reality of the fact that gender is here, feminism is there, and CODESRIA has to be part of the institutions that are fronting this. And my sense is that the torch is moving on because the input of the work of the militants, both within CODESRIA and outside CODESRIA, has led to the emergence of younger academics who are also in themselves leading the discussion in different and new directions. So that from the era of women in development, we're studying even more interesting topics. Our colleague from Sudan, whose name we got from a partner organization idea, feminist economics, okay? Sexuality, gender, Egodi. You are in the institute that led the discussion on masculinity, okay? Sports. The Institute on Sports was conceptualized on the back of the fact that South Africa was holding the World Cup. And what questions did that raise for the continent in relation to sports? So we had an institute on sports. Okay? Feminist scholarship generally has provoked CODESRIA into areas of analysis that otherwise we may not have been thinking about. And we've tried on the concept note to itemize some of the areas that we have worked in that give us the latitude. Questions about land and land tenure, the agrarian and the land question, for instance. What all this means for me and for CODESRIA is that we cannot rest and applaud ourselves just because we are 50. We need to ask deeper questions of us as we go into the 50, 51, 60, and for those who will be around, into the 100th celebration of CODESRIA's existence. And finally, I would like to make the point that there is an added value over and above the knowledge we produce. It's an added value with respect to networking and how the networks we create around feminist scholarship can begin to influence the knowledge we produce generally. Okay? 428 laureates of the Institute down the line. What do we need to do about this resource that we have created? It was in this context that we, for instance, decided that we were going to look for Lydia from Cameroon. Because we were sitting down with my team, we were looking at everybody who has been in the institute and asking ourselves, where are they and what are they doing? Okay? And to have somebody who was at the first Gender Institute tells you of the long journey that we have made and the impact we might be making as CODESRIA that we do not know. There are, I think in this room, I don't know who else was at the inaugural conference on engendering social sciences in Africa. Henry was there. I'm not sure if Penda was there. From that journey to now, we have placed ourselves in different places on the continent. And I want to conclude by asking that question about intentionality. Because I feel that the point about networking and the intention of creating epistemic communities is central to beginning to influence the direction, not just of CODESRIA research, but research around the gender and feminist questions going forward. So I want to stop here and thank all of you for joining us, for bearing with the intimidating room that we have been allocated. If it's intimidating on our side, it was even more intimidating on me on this side. And to just conclude by thanking Josephine Ahichere, who has been on a journey with CODESRIA for such a long time. Those of us who started attending the Gender Symposium organized in Cairo will remember how much we've done. We anticipate that we will have Professor Joy Kwesiga, if she's already not here, who is at the heart of the journey of the School of Women and Gender Studies at Makerere University. We had invited Zen Tadase. She unfortunately could not make it. She cancelled last week. She was at the table when the discussion around the CODESRIA Gender Institute was being discussed. We had also invited Professor Aisha Imam, who unfortunately was unable to make it. Georgie Chikata, who unfortunately had a different meeting in Kampala last week, and she had to leave for other engagements in London. And other people whom I can mention off the top of my head that I haven't seen, but we were unable to bring them. Rudo Gaizanwa, for instance. People who were at the heart of making the argument that forced the late Thandika Mkandawire to acknowledge and institute Gender Institute as one of the main vehicles for mobilizing researchers in CODESRIA. We are grateful to all these senior colleagues, friends of CODESRIA, militants who have pushed CODESRIA in a direction that we can only be appreciative of. And to all the other colleagues who are taking over, moments of handing down the baton is coming, and I think that we should mark it with both a reflection and a celebration. So thank you very much. I'll stop here, and I will ask Nri to make her presentation. We have taken Pinky Mekwe out of this session because she only arrived this morning because of a delay on her flight. So she will join the panel in the afternoon, and hopefully you can build on this. And
okay, good morning again. I barely made it myself because I arrived from New York to Abidjan on today's what? I'm so yes, jet lag. I arrived in the evening, and the next morning, which was yesterday, I had to fly back here. So, but I'm very pleased to join you, and I look forward to the one-on-one, the impromptu discussions that are always so enriching in these kind of meetings. I don't know how much time, 15 minutes? 15, 20 minutes? I did not prepare, well, I prepared something to answer the request that I speak mostly from my experience as a member, a former member of the scientific committee. But I had other roles in CODESRIA that made it possible for me to reflect on the gender, the activities, what goes on. Is not enough. As I'm glad you have spoken so honestly about what we mean actually, how intentional we are when we include gender. Is it to attract funding, to make sure that we will please the potential and actual institution, organizations that fund CODESRIA? These are fundamental questions that are still very relevant. If we are not entirely pleased with the transformation that is expected to take place, then these questions must continue to be asked. How intentional we are, and what do we produce? How those who come through the program, how do they incorporate that in their activities and action? What I am going to do is to mention a few aspects. The ground and front of engagement, as you mentioned, that seminal meeting that took place in Dakar in the early 1990s. Discussion had taken place in different ways. As you know, AWAD, Association for the Development of African Women for Development, was a based house by CODESRIA. Fundamental questions were raised what does it mean to have a very energetic, very really far-reaching program created by women, those inspiring women. Personally, I see still them as a really the one that we should still learn from, because of how daring they were to interrogate, to challenge the system that used to study African women, have colorful pictures on books, but without very much their own perspectives. And I was wondering if Achola, who's not far from here, I was wondering if she would be here. But anyway, so this is not only CODESRIA, it's that presence of award within CODESRIA constituted a ground, a reality that CODESRIA could not ignore. Although in terms of structure, epistemological issues, having the gender unit located within this broader social science program that didn't have gender as its core, as part of its core vision in the beginning. It was a ground for interrogation, and so eventually then CODESRIA held that meeting. I think it was in 1991 in Dakar, out of which a book was published, co-edited by our sister Fatou and Aisha Imam and Amina Mama. And some of us contributed chapters in that book. It was eventually translated into French. So there was a lot of promise. There were some achievements. I am not in a position now, because I have not accessed the statistics, to actually analyze more meticulously what we consider to be achievement. But in terms of the patterns, the realities are consistently there. The Gender Institute is held regularly, with the exception, as mentioned by the Executive Secretary. But how do we produce the societal transformative objectives for which the Gender Institute was created? So this is one dimension. I personally have participated in it. When Fatou Sow was the coordinator, she invited me. I have tried maybe once or twice to serve as coordinator. It didn't work for some reason, but I'm happy that another sister was able to coordinate it. So in terms of my reflection within the scientific committee, of which I was a member from 2009 to 2015, it's a 3-year term, but there were circumstances that led to prolonged service. A service that was sometimes very difficult, in the sense that being bilingual, often I had a load. I was not the only one, but usually when you are in that position, you have the load of reviewing the submissions in English, and so also reviewing literally all the submission in French. That was not a burden. It was not easy, but it was a wonderful opportunity to actually understand some of the dynamics, because as I will explain later, we talk about gender, but gender is not in isolation. It's the how the gender intersect. So this intersectionality was very much revealed by this experience of reading submissions in English and submissions in French. Of course, there was always also the situation of the Lusophone, or sometimes these terms are contested because when we talk about Francophone countries, the majority of the people in those countries do not speak French, do not operate or function in French, but these are to reflect, as we know, our colonial histories that define the way we organize our institutions, the way the education systems are run, the different policies, often looking at the artificial borders. You have the same ethnic groups, same African culture, but across the border, experiences are different. Access to education is different, simply because of these colonial traditions. So they are very, very important part of our experiences. So what I observed, and here I'm not going to do an intellectual presentation, since I'm asked to just share experiences in the executive committee. As I just mentioned, what was reflected in the intersectionality is that the culture, the African culture of the specific areas, specific countries, and the colonial history or legacies are very much present. First of all, in terms of the submission, the number of submission, and it is not proportional to the population. There was something that was happening. I don't know how it has evolved, but there were consistently fewer submissions from the Francophone countries. And there are also some areas of paradox. Few years ago, I was asked by as a member of a team that was selected by the UNESCO Institute of Statistics, which is based at the University of Montreal, to study the evolution, decades of evolution of gender, women's presence in higher education institutions. It was quite not surprising, but heartbreaking to see the statistics on Africa as a region. Of course, we have these differences, what is referred to sometimes as the Southern African exceptionalism, which is not due to some sort of affirmative action, is the political economy and politics in the region that has led to that. But in the case of the Lusophone countries, some systematic, deliberate efforts were made to increase the gender, to close the gender gap. And it was, the statistics I looked at, it was reflected all the way to the STEM fields. So very striking. However, here also, there's a paradox that the submission from the Lusophone countries were not reflecting this advanced representation of women and gender issues being dealt with politically. So The other experience I had under the leadership of Bio, he created multinational working groups, and I was asked to serve as the coordinator for the multinational working group on higher education, which led to a manuscript, I hope it will come out at some point, titled African Higher Education in Transition, Recurrent Impediment, Emerging Challenges and New Potentialities. There also, I had the same experience as within the scientific committee of the gap, the imbalance between the different regions and different colonial legacies, underrepresentation of the Francophone, and underrepresentation of the female scholars submitting. Here is where I asked a question, and is in an article I wrote some time back, I talk about the fallacy of quota-like solutions. Because it's not enough to bring women under specific circumstances to lower the standard, whatever it takes. But if you do not address the issues, the reason why they were not there on equal strength, then this is just a symbolic gesture. Because there's nothing that has shown that women are less capable. Actually, many studies show that. As you take a cohort of a student, as you move on, the women who persist, who are not out as a result of all sorts of issues, lack of resources, early pregnancy, you name it, those who persist actually outperform the males. So it's not a matter of capacity, it's a matter of policy. You all know all this, so I'm just sharing my experience, the question we were asking. So what to do to make sure that there is enough preparation? I think you have said that things have changed, or there were different results if deliberate actions are taken. The other dimension that I was reflecting on was how to provide feedback that will be different from the traditional, conventional way you give one or two feedbacks and that's it. How do we provide some kind of workshop, training, one-on-one feedback that would be kind of a process of learning, of acquiring skills. I will not go specifically into what I saw as the strengths and the major weaknesses in the different type of proposals that were submitted over the years. But the point to make is that there had been consistently a need for providing more than just giving feedback, few comments. I served on a selection committee of another program, not Ford Foundation, IDRC. And it was the same experience in terms of the authors of these submissions, the weaknesses, and what actually would be needed so that they could gather strength, acquire the necessary skills in order to make it, if the proposals are selected, how to manage the rest of the process. So the point that I wanted to share is that the national policies, some countries provide more support, more learning opportunities, and other countries do not. So it's not the mere fact of being male, female. It's what is the learning context. One of my own works on this is this book that came out of a conference, Women and Higher Education in Africa, Reconceptualizing Gender-Based Human Capabilities and Upgrading Human Right to Knowledge, which has been translated into French, into Spanish, into Arabic. The Chinese version is coming soon, and the Portuguese as well. So the question that we were asking here are that at some point, of course things have evolved, but at some point when we talk about women's access to education, the focus is only on alphabétisation fonctionnelle, you name it. Yes, it is important. If the women are not there, girls are not there, don't look for them as women years later on campuses or in labs and so on and so forth. So that's true. At the same time, it's important to focus on the higher education, because it's not higher education as an end in itself, as the final step of a system. It is conceptualized as part of a circle. If women are at that level, they are able, with the consciousness, it's not the biological makeup of the people, but it's in their mind. If they have the right conceptualization of what it takes to create a new society of gender parity, then they will influence from the very beginning. So it's a full circle that requires that women be present at those levels. So this is one of the reflections. In my preparation here, but I'm going to skip it, I presented the institutional setting, the traditional, part of my training is in history, sociology, and at the higher level, PhDs, education, economics of education, human resource, human capacity development. So I look at this so-called production function model, what shapes people's upbringing, what influences their learning opportunities, the input, the institutional setting, and the result, not only the result, but also the outcome. But what is of importance for us here? What is that outcome? When I mentioned the case of Lusophone countries earlier, yes, these women have managed, because of the proper policy, to make it, and yet they are not represented where they're supposed to be. To be able to transform, to make changes in the policies. So, yes, okay. I'm being reminded I have 1.5 minutes. So my question is the CODESRIA's being a Pan-African institution, how it has created opportunities but has not lived up to its potential. It's unfortunate that the executive secretary is sitting here, but don't take it personally. Why is that we have not yet have a woman executive secretary, while we keep doing the, pardon me? Yeah? Unless I missed a few years, I have not seen one yet. Yes, so this is important. This is what is reflected in the political system and so forth. So it has to be reflected in our institution, starting with CODESRIA. So it is commendable that CODESRIA has had this institute, but there are other levels where it could make a statement more powerfully and provide the space so that more transformative policies can be conceptualized and actualized. So I don't know if I made sense, but I did not prepare a presentation in a conventional way, given this topic of CODESRIA's experience with gender research toward a feminist epistemic breakthrough. But let me finish by saying that if the term feminism is not fully accepted, it's more complex than that. So it still requires some deliberation. So it's not something that, it depends on why the feminism is not accepted. So there are some epistemological issues, some historical factors, and those who may not want to be referred to as feminists may be doing as important work as those who have the label. So beyond the label, that's what I would say. Okay, so I will stop here, so we will have a more conversation later. So thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I look forward to the conversations.
Oh, thank you very much. Just to make a clarification that we deliberately need not require any formalized presentation. I think the spirit of our conversation has to be provoke a reflection. And there is a colleague who is taking notes, and we're challenging them to engage our reflection. And hopefully we will publish the rapporteur's report in the CODESRIA bulletin and share with everybody, but carry the lessons that we hear from you. So thank you very much for that intervention. Can I ask Vanessa to make your intervention? You are a laureate of the Institute. And so you're carrying the experience of 428 other. So please make your intervention, and thank you very much for accepting to be on this panel.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody.
C'est un véritable plaisir d'être
It is a real pleasure for me to be here, given that my experience with CODESRIA has been particular. I always have problems of passports. I'm always the last one to come out of airports. It was in 2018. Even today it was difficult. But I really thank CODESRIA for all these efforts that they're making to make sure that the participants are present. I was laureate of the Institute in 2018, and this experience really allowed me to get a perspective which was general in terms of CODESRIA and also in terms of research on gender. I'm going to begin by presenting the national context in which I was when I participated in this institute. Actually, in 2018, I was a student of doctorate. I was writing my thesis on the promotion of women in Cameroonian political space, especially at the level of the counties. And it was the first time that I was participating in that the debate, and it was my director of research who got me that chance, and I was very interested as a student of the doctorate. First of all, at the academic level, there was training on gender, and in master's, that's when I had started training in gender. I was really interested, especially in the second year when I undertook writing my memoir, my thesis on gender. And then when I came to the institute, I got to understand the training on gender in the universities, and that allowed me to see the challenges that I was facing. Also, I noted that at the level of my library, where I was, we didn't have a lot, given that in the Francophone Africa, especially Cameroon, it was very difficult to get access to these documentations on gender. And therefore, for the institute, I had submitted the publication which I wanted to undertake on the marginalization of feminist studies at Yaoundé 2, University of Yaoundé 2. It was accepted. I was so happy. I was struck by the way the institute was organized, given they were giving a chance to the laureates to talk about their presentation, and each laureate would present their presentation, and then we were able to make remarks on the presentations of others. And it helped us to improve our communication, really, because it was very relevant to the work that we're doing. Also, in terms of the institute, there was a possibility for us to contact resource persons so that we could talk about our progress in terms of our different activities, our different academic work. It was also a way for us to pose questions, difficult questions which we wanted to answer for finishing our thesis. But the main challenge that I met after having submitted my article is that there was an absence of communication in terms of those, the publication of the 16. The article which I had elaborated, which I think it came out much later, and they were requesting me to revise, but I didn't understand whether there were many other things that I should have improved. During the time that I did not have communication, I didn't know whether the article is going to be produced quickly. I was looking for chances of publication. I was looking at other houses of publication, but thank God I got into network. During that institute, I got into the network with the other laureates, and some of them had finished their papers, but those papers had not been accepted because it was an interaction that we had of 1 or 2 days, and I think that was regrettable because if a laureate has prepared a paper, submission, and then it's not accepted because that person was late by 1 or 2 days, I think that's very, very sad. And other papers were not able to be submitted because of problems within the universities, because of the different experiences But in my case, my publication was accepted. In terms of the impact, this research had a lot of impact. The article was taken again over and over by the different internet platforms of CODESRIA. There were congratulations. There were people who were asking me to publish with them. I think that experience which I got, I think it was one of the best in terms of my scientific development. I would maybe make one comment that in order for the Institute to be more efficient, we should try to make the communication to be more regular, more followed up, so that there can be a monitoring of the laureate when the laureate goes back to look at the challenges that the laureate may be meeting within their countries, so that in the end you could help, because in terms of research you can never know why the person hasn't submitted on time. Maybe it could be a problem of permission, university permission to do the research, or it could be family. I would wish that we could be less rigid in terms of the deadline. The second recommendation which I could make is to see how CODESRIA could publish. I don't know whether it's already being done. If they could produce also the research which is undertaken in French into English. Because concerning my publication, I think I received five other journals which were requesting for my article, which they wanted to reproduce it to have a better impact, because at the international level, the researches which are done in English seem to have more resounding impact than those in French. I don't know whether that has been proven, but I think it is useful. And in terms of my research, if I could make a small summary on my research, I would wish to invite you to look at it online. It was a feminist research on social transformation in the University of Yaoundé. We were talking about the marginalization of feminist studies, and thanks to the Institute, I managed to change the title. I was exposed to better methods of research. I really thank CODESRIA for this opportunity of research, and I hope that also in future the other institutes are going to be better than the one I attended. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for that intervention. A part of the reason you are here, Vanessa, is because the team that we were working together actually was trying to get at least a number of laureates of the Institute who not only attended the Institute, but actually delivered on their commitments to the Institute. And we have a real serious challenge about laureates who come into the Institute, and when they leave, they are gone. So it's really inspiring for us, at least in the Secretariat, to acknowledge this particular point. We obviously are running late with our time, but I think we should have a brief interaction. We'll try to claw back sometime in this session, but also in the next session, and hopefully we should be able to break out for lunch on time. So if there are any interventions from the participants, please take advantage of this. Any questions, any comments, additional reflections, you're welcome. Yes, Pan.
Thank you very much to have an insight into this, into the the history of the work that has been done by CODESRIA, especially with regards to the Gender Institute. It's not unique in terms of the struggle of gender and women specifically. I just am struck by how the whole history and maneuvers just speak to the kind of fatigue that I have with dealing with systems that are not disrupted fundamentally. In fact, I'm almost giving up on, I hear you are hinting a little bit that perhaps it's policy that needs to change. I'm almost giving up on that too. I actually think that we need a prolonged way of making civic interventions, vociferous ones, strong ones, continue on the agenda of fighting, if I may put it that way, when it comes to gender. Because I don't see how we are going to get into intentionality and get into a space of epistemic communities with regards to the subject of gender unless we challenge the structures. In other words, I'm saying gender budgeting is fine. Gender mainstreaming is fine. But it is actually saying, dear structures, we see you and we dignify you. We just need a little bit of space for women. We just need a little bit of funds to come this way. But actually what we need is to ask, where are the men here? And why are the men not here to listen to the fact that actually the problem is the privatization of subjugation, because we are respecting the fact that they are not here because they are doing more important things, possibly. Or that we will go home and continue with the double day because they are not here to listen to the fact that they must also change nappies, actually. That is what we are, that is the issue. And we're not going to get there via tinkering with policy, because policy is seriously masculine, patriarchal, and it's never going to, it's just going to be, we're just going to be doing handshakes with policy. We need a disruption socially. I can say this because we are puzzled in South Africa about the intensification of gender-based violence. Every day we are modernizing inequality. Every day we are gender budgeting and mainstreaming. But women are being killed. They are being chopped, put into suitcases and thrown with the trucks that are collecting garbage. It's getting worse. And you wonder, where is the problem? And that's the extreme. But every day, professionally, there is professional gender violence, where women are sifted. It's the kind of thing where you are saying people are increasing representation, but it does not translate into visible submissions, because the things that are preventing women from being productive have been privatized and respected in the private space, and we are not disrupting that. We need to ask a fundamental question. In the leap and in moving forward, we need to ask a fundamental question. Where are the men? What is their slice and what are they committing to? Thank you.
Ce qui manque aujourd'hui,
Thank you very much. There is something that is missing.
L'absence de passion.
It's the absence of passion.
Je me souviens des débats.
I remember the debates, epic debates that we had at the level of our ward. We also asked them at the level of CODESRIA. There was a passion to mobilize all the intelligence of Africa. I think, unfortunately, this passion has disappeared. Even if we recognize everything that what we did had an impact, and it will have an impact on our future. That was my first remark. Secondly, I had to lead an institution which was scientific, and the other one was higher education. I remember a Nigerian professor who was very condescending, who had a despising attitude against women. And then there was an anthropology who was repeating the same theories. And what was interesting, in terms of those two institutes where I was a leader, eventually they changed because the men need those institutes of gender more than women, I've noticed. Third thing that I noticed, you're saying that now Executive Secretary of Women in CODESRIA. The United Nations has also never had a secretary who is a woman. But we find women who represent us within that. These are problems which we note, but what I noticed, on those institutes of gender where I was a leader, we managed to push the reflections, and when we have work which is undertaken, the impact is going to be important. And I think that we should try to go back to what we were doing and we go through it again so that the new generations can also benefit.
Okay. So my comment is a recognition that a lot of the terms of the conversation and its consequences of it are about both permission and admission within a kind of broader structure. So whether it's CODESRIA or a broader kind of infrastructure of higher education or knowledge production. And I wonder if we can turn it, maybe perhaps in reflection of the fatigue that's also being expressed, to what the possibilities of an intramural discussion might be for feminist epistemic communities that do exist and a wide transnational feminist activist and epistemic set of communities, connections, and relations where the language is not permission and admission. It's about the conditions of, so the power relations about knowledge production are about how one situates their location on the condition of multiple identities, whether it's research consulting, it's academic research, or it's as an activist. The dynamic of that conversation is an intramural conversation, whereas here I wonder what it looks like where it's not permission admission. Is there a possibility for an intramural if that's the nature of what the discussion should be 50 years later? Or is the premise, like as you've stated, is it the premise of functioning inclusion that is intentionally non-performative because it's about resources, but it's not an intramural debate or discussion. It's out of context, if you get my sense.
Yeah. Thanks very much for very thought-provoking presentations. I sit here from a vantage point of having been the Director of Research at CODESRIA, but also having directed the Governance Institute. I think it was in the early 2000s. And it was perhaps the first time that within the Governance Institute, after my observations of what had been happening at CODESRIA and the different institutes that we've had, I decided to send a proposal to CODESRIA with gender being a theme for the Governance Institute. And I think that interface was, to me, and it still is, extremely important. And I take my cue from Dre when she talks about the urgency and the need of a feminist consciousness. And I think that feminist consciousness, unlike my friend Pearl, who just said that she's a little bit disillusioned with policies, it seems to me, I would like to take a more pragmatic viewpoint, and I think that there is a need for us to have a better articulation between research and the policy-making direction, especially if we want to bring that feminist consciousness in those particular spaces. So I would be presenting a paper, of course, tomorrow on the urgency of feminist economics in the post-pandemic era. But before this presentation, it seems to me that as we engage in an informal manner, to take the cue from the Executive Secretary, it would be good for us to reflect upon how can we possibly try to get those two institutes to speak to each other in a more vocal and open way. Because the creation of policies, the making of policies, governance, the managing of affairs of the state, and social transformation and transformation that we're talking about would certainly emerge from there. So how do we take our gender research to speak to that is key to trying to think of making a difference. That's the first point. Now, the second point is that it seems also to me that although we have all these gender institutes and governance institutes, and I've listened to Vanessa carefully, I think there is no doubt that all these institutes have contributed to a fantastic level of richness in terms of ideas and people and laureates that we've produced. There is no doubt about that. But then, what is it that either the directors or the laureates themselves, what is it that we can do as a community of researchers to try and follow up with that? It is a challenge, it is not easy. But then again, it seems to me that everybody is doing their little bit, and then we go off, and then we come to these meetings that we get invited to, but there is no sense of ability to follow up with the researchers, not only in terms of the publications, perhaps, and more concretely, I would like to propose, it's something that we can consider later on, I would like to propose some kind of a gender focal point, a CODESRIA gender focal point within the different institutions of learning and within the universities who work afterwards with those laureates, not only in terms of the director conveying the message, but in terms of that gender focal point within those institutes following up. Somebody who's got experience of CODESRIA's work, obviously, not anybody. I have a few more points, but I'd like to keep them for later and give a chance to others to talk and respond. But thank you again for this very important meeting. And Godwin, perhaps as we strategize for the next few years, within the strategic plan, there are certain points that we would like to perhaps raise in terms of how do we get a better representation. Dre, you spoke enormously about the lack of representation of certain communities within the CODESRIA circles. And I think there is a need to probably try, to me, it's not only a question of representation. I'm one of those who always speaks about the necessity of moving from a politics of representation to a politics of ideas, to a politics of transformation. And if we want to have this politics of transformation, what is it that we can do to chip in there, in that space? And we will make some proposals later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this has been a really rich morning in terms of starting to think forward. I guess mine is both an observation and then the questions that are in my mind as a result. And I'm really thinking about what does it mean to think about the history of where we've come from in light of who is present in the room. And this started to be sparked by our introductions. And then also the history, Godwin, when you were speaking and you spoke to the fact that the Institute has had more male fellows, people coming in than women. But then I looked at the room and I was like, where are they? And I'm thinking of that in light of what you said, this twin strategy of affirmative action in terms of who is present in the space of the Gender Institute, at the same time not compromising on the right to be present in terms of the contribution. And you had said that in terms of who is present, one of the things in terms of selection of who is coming from the institutes previously, like Vanessa, are people who, you're looking at their work and at their contribution. So I'm thinking in terms of that, in relation to what does it mean to think about masculinities within CODESRIA. How is this in conversation with the discourse around feminism, around mainstreaming feminist praxis into the broader work, and also around this thing we're always dancing around, why are people afraid? And I think in the concept note, the words that were used was the fear of using the word feminism within the broader community. So these are just things that are in my mind, and I don't know if I'm asking a question for a response or more than where has our investment in all these laureates, in all these papers gone in terms of what we are seeing present in this space and the program that we have. Thank you.
As the mic moves, I would like to recognize our real host, Professor Sarah Sali. I'm sure she was fixing something somewhere. You're welcome, the Dean, School of Women and Gender Studies, Makerere University. We shall hear more in the afternoon.
Okay, thank you very much. I also think that this has been a very rewarding conversation. As the comments and responses were going on, I think one word kept, coming to me, and the word is continuity. Continuity. It just kept coming to me. I like to look at gender and feminist movements from the point of the movement itself. So we look at the Seneca Falls Convention, for instance, and then the movement that began at that point. Then the theories that emerged as a result of that movement. Then the practice of that theory. Because I'm from the humanities and social sciences, I also want to look at the way creativity has come to play. All the female writers that we continue to celebrate. But then the reality is, for each generation of women, it gets to a point people begin to advance in age, and then there's a kind of weariness that sets in. And I think weariness is another key word. So what happens between the time the fire begins to burn out and then there's supposed to be continuity, which, in a way for me, brings in the issue of mentoring. You have younger people at each point that the older generation can impact, such that even when the fire appears to be going down, there's a new set of people to hand the baton over to, who encourage those who are, going ahead and who have done so much. As I was reflecting on the concept note, I remember that I attended a workshop where someone spoke about cancer, particularly breast cancer, for women in, higher education in Africa, and how that impacts on, the work they do. So at some point, the strength is no longer there. Then there's a break in, transmission. So that's why I think that continuity should be a key word and something that we really need to think of in terms of developing this strategy, whether it's in the policy or it's in the theory or it's in the weariness about the words that, we use for these conversations. Thank you.
So I would like to ask, what are you doing to make gender research independent, reflecting the real lived experiences of African men and women without any foreign intervention? And secondly, it's a comment. We realize that most of the people who are interested in what you write are ordinary people who can hardly understand English and French. Most of the words which are used in your books, they are so hard for the ordinary people to understand them. So my request is, or my proposal is, can we have your publications translated to African languages so that all people can understand them? Thank you so much.
But I think that the reflection has to transform itself into something we own as a team and that we push on to CODESRIA. That's how Penda and Drew will tell you. That's what happened in the early 90s when a movement of young academics with a feminist consciousness demanded that CODESRIA must stop being an institution only of councils and institutes and become an institution with individual membership. And that is what has given us the hope that we are trying to think through today. So I just want to caution that I think let us move towards really strategic interventions that allow us, and I want to mention that there are 2 members of the executive committee in the room, to actually go back and ask CODESRIA those important changes that it has to make in order to remain at the forefront, if at all it's there, in advancing this. So I want to ask Ndri to do a brief reflection, and Vanessa to do another brief reflection, depending on any question that came that is provocative enough. And among those should be the question, when are we going to have the next female executive secretary of CODESRIA? Can Vanessa first? Okay. Okay, Vanessa.
Merci. Je vais répondre à la question.
I'm going to respond to the question which was posed. I'm going to leave the worry to my elders to answer the more complex questions. He talked about 2 things which attracted my attention. The first one, the translation of the working documents into local African languages. It is an interesting question, but there is a problem with that strategy, because I think that it's a strategy which can work at the local level, considering the particular country, considering each country. But I think when we go to the level of the continent, it will be very complicated, because I remember that how will the scientific committee choose which language to use for that translation? In Cameroon, we have more than 250 local languages. Already at the level of one country, it's already complicated. So it's very complicated to know which language we are going to choose, which one we're going to leave out, how we're going to manage it so that others don't feel that they are left out. Maybe there's some local languages which make unanimity at the international level. Maybe we can consider that. But now I don't know what at the level of CODESRIA, what can be done in terms of the research work. I don't know what we can do to make that available as you had suggested.
Well, just a few words about these very powerful interventions, and that would require more time for us to have a longer dialogue. Well, the feeling overwhelmed when things don't seem to be changing. What do we do? Well, we had this experience before with the colonial system. According to the prediction of the structures in Europe, by now we would not even have the symbolic so-called independence. Even if it's symbolic, we still have it. But for them, there would be centuries ahead, and in the end, we would be incorporated as a people who are dominated for good. Of course, there are many ways in which they are still exercising their power, but it's not the same as when there was the formal system. How did it happen? Without the women, it would not have happened. In my own country, Côte d'Ivoire, I wrote a book on these women who created that momentum, 1944-45, that literally led to a stage of the independence movement. They didn't know how to read and write. They used the African language, African culture, of how women participate. They reclaimed their space, which in the end helped everybody. So one important thing is, with this, the gender, women, men, it's critically important for everybody to know that it is in our collective interest that things change. That if women are given their full humanity, they will contribute to society, and men, women, the entire society will benefit. So this is where it is important. If they think that's an illusion, to think that they are in power, they can exercise a physical violence. Does it improve your own mental being, your own social location? No, it's an illusion. So how do we put in the mind that the best thing for all of us to do is to give equal importance to men, women, to create a social space where we are all equal, where we do our respective parts. So what kind of strategy, if what we have been trying is no longer working? Well, that's the important thing. Let us think of what else can be done. But it's not either or. We can continue to use the old-fashioned way, and Penda parlait de ça, cette passion, and then build on and find new ways. There are new realities. The system is coming with a vengeance, with new ways of pressing. So we need to develop new strategies. We need to be able to develop more relevant tools for the new challenges. So yes, we cannot afford to be so discouraged that we cannot move forward. C'est ça, Penda. Bon, tu as bien résumé ce qui s'est passé.
Penda, you very well summarized what happened. It was important that some people push the door and open the door. And once we open that door, then others could enter. But the problem which is happening is that once we entered into the door, the structures remained. They were dominated. So how can we change the space that we entered into? How can we change the spaces that we entered into? I think it's good that we have the veterans like us, but we're getting others who are joining us, younger ones. I think we should interest them in seeing that it is a social problem. It's not that women are going to gain something and men are going to lose something. No, that is a fallacy. It is an erroneous conception. We have to change that mentality.
In addition to continuity, it's very important to have a notion of cumulative process. You can continue. It becomes a ritual that comes maybe almost like it has been done. But what is the end result? How do we count for how all the things that have happened, how they add up to have that transformative capacity? That's what we need, and all of us. I think maybe I'm not addressing all. The translation is critically important. In some countries, they have a lingua franca. If you translate it in that language, if you translate it in Wolof in Senegal, most people will be able to access it. If you translate it in what? Yes, Kiswahili, many people will be able to access it. So for this particular case, the book, the gentleman who spoke there, I'll leave you this copy. Feel free to translate it in any language that you think will be useful. But you're talking more broadly about the work we do. It's not only the language, it's also the language of how the intellectual way of communicating can prevent people from understanding, from accessing the content of what is they are trying to communicate. So language is at a different level. The literal language, but also the language, intellectual language, and how do we make it, break it down so that it can be used for policy and so on and so forth. So, yes, so yeah, we still, all of us have work to do. And again, it's society that will benefit. Each of us will benefit from transformation of, and CODESRIA is trying to do its part. It can do it better and continue. And some recommendations have been made. How do we follow up? Going to the Gender Institute is not only to acquire specific knowledge, or also to have that for some, and I know what I'm talking about, is to have that on their CV. Wow, this is an enlightened man who has attended a Gender Institute. But I hope for most, it will be really to acquire some skills, some knowledge that they will apply to the space where they have the capacity to make transformation. May the people who knew the person see the transformation as a result of the Gender Institute. So again, we all have a work to do, and we would like to take the opportunity personally to thank you for inviting us, for acknowledging the creation of CODESRIA. It takes really this commitment, vision, and I'm sure you will talk about Samir Amin, who had the vision of creating CODESRIA, this space. So again, thank you, and I look forward to our continued conversation.
Oh, thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of this panel, and we're listening. I just want to make the commitment again that what would really help me and those ones of us who have the privilege, the rare honor of leading the council, it's going to be, how do we disrupt? What are the most suitable ways by which we can conduct that disruption so that we don't disrupt CODESRIA so it stops being there, but rather we make it better. and I'm hoping that in the final panel to our meeting, we're really going to think carefully about that. Because I think that I identify very much with the points raised on the floor. I think Penda raised the point, Sheila, Pal, Denai raised the point, Mshai. It's absolutely important for me that it no longer is about tinkering. We now have 5 female on the executive committee, and then we are happy. Or now we have half on the scientific committee, then we are happy. Or now we are budgeting based on gender, we are happy. How do we get in there and assure everyone that the diversities of society are given nearly as much prominence and presence, and they reflect in the institutional culture as much as we could? the point that Sheila raised about getting the Gender Institute and Governance Institute to speak to each other. We've now started doing that. Awino is there. The last Gender and Governance Institute was forced to speak to each other, and the theme was women, girls, and shrinking civic spaces. Okay? I feel this is only but a start. What else are we going to do to change in there? And raise the question about when will CODESRIA have a female executive secretary? Sorry to depress you, it has been even worse at the lower level. At the level of the leadership, senior leadership of the council, it's been an intolerably male structure that isn't as useful to me as to anyone in the council. So even before we speak up there is a more basic problem that we're now trying to deal with. And hopefully this reflection can help us find a way. And I want to walk to the General Assembly with the community, telling them that we had the reflections and we agreed on the ABCD and we're implementing it. So really my challenge here is let's find strategies of that disruption. I want to acknowledge the presence of Professor Joy Kwesiga, who just joined us a few minutes ago, and Professor Sylvia Tamale, who just joined us a few minutes ago. And welcome and happy. I am happy to welcome you to Makerere University. So we'll take a break for 20 minutes, and then we will come back for the recorded version of Professor Fatuso's presentation. We will cut back on the response from Mshai in the interest of time, so that we can catch up with the afternoon session on time. So thank you very much and all the way.
Pink is asking me, why don't you go to the front? I think the reason why I don't go to the front is I'm literally speaking from the floor. I'm literally like, that was the insider perspective. I'm speaking as someone coming to this, and I did say in the morning that this is my first Gender Institute. And so what I was asked to do is give a reflection, as Godwin says, motivate, and say, if I was listening to this for the first time, what are the questions? What would be coming to my mind? What are the lessons that I am saying, okay, now, this is what we need to think about? I just need to get right there. Thank you. So, let me just say, for me, when I was listening to it, first of all, I think right from the beginning, and I thought, what a strategic... Thank you. This is why I love working, with people who know feminist perspectives of working together. Thank you. But I think she helped us in terms of just even how she introduced herself. So let me invite you, as you reflect, as you respond, as you think through, to do what she did. To begin by a space of self-reflection, understanding who you are, the journey that you've come through, why you are where you are, and what is it that you bring to bear in the discussion that you can now share. And I think often we are shy about naming, I have come all this way, I have been part of this, we have achieved this, this is what I have offered. And I think it's really important that since we are here, we talked about generational perspectives, we talked about the context that we work from, we talked about the language, all that we talked about. I thought it was really amazing that she started by reminding us that. And of course, she worked very hard with the government of Senegal to be able to demonstrate to us that location matters. It matters in terms of our national context, what they are doing. The work that we do is not theoretical. There are everyday implications. So even the fact that we were told you can either hear or you can see means something, because that is often the case for feminists. Even getting your voice to be heard, getting your presence to be in a space can sometimes be a challenge. I think she's challenging us to think about what it means that we work in the languages that we work. Both the languages in terms of I'm speaking in English, she was speaking in French, but also that we use as academics or as intellectuals working in different spaces. I think it is important for us to locate ourselves also in terms of our generation. What does it mean? And she said very specifically, I am towards the end of my career. And this morning people talked about what does it mean to have mentors in the room and to be beginning your career, and what does that bring to us? We were also challenged, and she's reminded us, to be clear about the historical moments that we are in, to understand what is going on, what is the institutional context, and what does it mean when we say we are invested either as feminists or as gender scholars, and what does it do to choose whichever term that we choose? What are the politics of our work? What are the politics of the spaces that we work? Let me just also remind us that she took us back to what we did this morning, understanding the ground that has been covered. But as a reminder that CODESRIA's story and CODESRIA's journey is also part of a wider journey of the African intellectual community. And what does that mean? And I hope we will also talk about, therefore, what is the vision that we come to out of this moment? I really appreciated her situating the discussions of where the work in CODESRIA began in terms of gender studies, gender work, in terms of the global contexts. So, as we think about what we have achieved as CODESRIA and the community of African intellectuals, let us also ask, what have we not yet achieved and why? So that the agenda, the vision, the strategy, and the focus as individuals and as a collective emerges out of that. She illustrated why certain things were picked, why they were not picked, and the strategies came out of that. Quickly on some things about strategy, I think she spoke very, very profoundly to the conceptual work. How do we define the terms that we use and choose? How do we define the sphere of work? What are the evolving nature of the questions that we are asking? How have even some of the terms, such as feminism, how have they evolved and grown? And I think most profoundly for me, what is the relationship between the concepts we use and the impact on the lives of African people, especially the women who are often invisible in intellectual and policy reflections of what it means to be human, and specifically what it means to be African at this point in time. She also invited us to think about the terrain. What questions are we asking? Where are they coming from? What are the case studies we're using? Why are we working with those specific case studies? And what does it mean to contrast case studies emerging out of particular contexts with case studies emerging out of other contexts, which is the power of networking? And what are the contexts they allow us to engage and the contexts they do not allow us to engage? And the consequences, again, to the real lives of people. The other invitation, I think, is to ask, what are the gains that the strategies we have used made in institutions, in terms of policy, in terms of politics, and in terms of the real lives of the communities that we both come from and we are also addressing? What battles are we still fighting? And why have we been unable to bring an end to those battles with a victory? What ground has been lost and why? I think this is really important, that sometimes we say, let's acknowledge we have lost that battle. Should we go back and fight it? Do we just let it be and move on? And what are the consequences of that? Why are we making those choices? And then in closing, I think she's inviting us to think through the issues our work entails. What do these issues actually demand of us? What are they raising? What questions are they asking us? What contexts are they asking us to address, and the priorities? And, I won't go through the whole list, but, in terms of the female body, who does it belong to? What does it mean to be in a particular body? What are the implications for the lives African people in those bodies live? How they are defined, framed, affirmed, negated, policed, punished, rewarded. The issues of regulation. Who regulates the space that men and women live, work, and be? Who makes decisions? The questions of power, how it is gendered and the implications thereof. What does it mean to work in the basket that we bring to our table of traditions, her stories, cultures? What does it mean that they are part of the lives and the work that we do? And then this issue of location. And I think one thing that is in the room, and I was listening very keenly, this question of what it means to define ourselves as feminists, or to choose not to define ourselves as feminists. To think of masculinities as part of the work that belongs to gender, or to say that masculinities are people we talk with and to, but they're not part of us. Just to ask, what does it mean to do the work that we do in the broad sphere of gender work? And then understanding, I think, what the relationship between the history she has outlined, the present we inhabit, and our vision for the future. So beyond recognizing, acknowledging, celebrating, castigating, articulating, making manifest, what use does our work get put to? And therefore, what does it mean in terms of how